I'm officially a YouTuber is, I think, what I'm feeling right now.
You are. This is it.
I'm excited to announce that I'm leaving legacy media.
I've spent the last 2+ decades working at big media companies like the Washington Post and CNN.
You may know me from TheVerge.com, but as of today, I no longer work there.
I'm not retiring from the world, but I have retired from the Times.
Now we're independent, which means we work for you guys.
I just don't like being an employee in the end. I always end up not liking it.
About 1 in 5 Americans regularly get news from influencers on social media today.
I was introduced as V-Spear Newsfluencer, to which I said, what is a newsfluencer? I've never heard that term.
I've been on the World Service, I've been on LBC, I've been on BBC One, I wrote in The Guardian. But because I also make video on social media, video that does well, suddenly I'm not the same. People like V and I are journalists, and that is what you can call us.
I think there'll be plenty to write about in the next few years.
Which from my point of view is really at the heart of addressing journalism trust crisis. And thank you to creator Becca Farsacci, I practiced that, Farsacci, for her permission to use that video. So my name is Tory Starr, and I'm the Senior Director of Digital Content here at GBH. In my role, I'm responsible for GBH establishing and implementing innovative content strategies across our platforms and our products. But over the past year or so, as you will definitely hear today, my understanding of what's been happening outside those platforms, I'm realizing is just as important as what we're producing on our own platforms. So this session will be exploring a different kind of divide, as you've heard earlier today. That between traditional newsrooms and media organizations and those doing their work independently on digital platforms. As our speakers will get into, the election has really marked sort of a turning point in how Americans get their news and information. The power dynamic is shifting away from mainstream media and towards the digital creator space. This hour will focus on how we can come to terms with that reality and provide some solutions, both for mainstream media and for independent creators, to be working better together to serve the public under the common goal of providing accurate and trusted information. So for today, we have a short lightning talk, followed by a panel of some very talented people working in this space, both from within media organizations and independently. And we will have time for your questions at the end, so please be thinking about that. Our lightning talk today is from Julia Angwin, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist who writes about the impacts of technology on society. Ms. Angwin is the founder of the nonprofit journalism studio Proof News, a best-selling author and a New York Times contributing opinion writer. She has been a Shorenstein Media and Democracy Fellow since the fall of 2023, most recently focusing on online content creators and how they've built trust with their audiences. So here to share the findings of her most recent research, please welcome Julia Angwin.
Hello, thank you guys. I am here to talk about what I've learned about trust from studying what content creators do to build trust with their audiences. So a small background on me, I'm fully legacy media trained, born and raised. Worked for the Wall Street Journal 14 years, ProPublica, and then for the past 6 years I've been in independent media, founding the newsroom, the Markup, and now Proof News. So I think I have to say next slide. Okay, next slide. So next slide. So I'm going to tell you something you already know, which is trust. Americans don't trust us. Mainstream media trust is now, majority of Americans say they have little to no trust in mainstream media. Next slide. One thing that we need to think about from this is we can talk about saving legacy journalism, but we also need to think about, well, why is the audience moving? And so that's what I have been studying. And I put out this paper last year about what is the future, what can we learn about trust and how we're going to build the audience. So to save you the trouble of reading that paper, I will summarize what I learned. Next slide. So I've had 2 different convenings of content creators where we talked about these issues, and then I did a bunch of interviews with them and other experts. This is one group of creators at Harvard that came to talk about it. Next slide. And then I had another one earlier this year with some of the people you just saw in that video, V. Spahar, Under the Desk News, and Joss Fong from Howtown on YouTube, and that's Jessica Yellen of News Not Noise. Next slide. I'm trying to snap my way through this. So basically what I learned was that there were sort of three elements of trust that the ways you can measure trust are on three different axes. And so basically trust is a construct between yourself, another person, and a third entity. So for instance, I can trust my husband to pay the mortgage, but I cannot trust him to pick up the socks. So the trust is dependent on, right, what is the topic? Is it socks or mortgage? So the elements of trust are benevolence. Do I think he has a benevolent interest in picking up the socks? I do not. Expertise. Does he have the expertise? Is he capable of picking up the socks? Yes, he does. And integrity. Are there consequences for him if he does not, if he abuses my trust, if he does not pick up the socks? And apparently there are not, right? So that's why he never picks up the socks. And I love him. He's great. Just using that as an example. But so that's sort of the framework of which I analyzed sort of how creators differ from traditional legacy journalists in those three metrics. So let's go through them one by one. So starting with benevolence. So benevolence is interesting because the way you communicate benevolence in terms of like my interests are aligned with yours is actually can often be about like taking audience suggestions, right? Like, why don't you cover this issue? Or I'm providing news that's helpful to you, useful. One thing that in traditional newsrooms that I come from, news you can use was always considered like a lesser beat that nobody wanted. It's not prestigious, it doesn't win the awards. But that's what actually builds trust with the audience, is they're feeling like, oh, you're providing me helpful information. You're not just saying like a bad thing is happening in the world, but they're telling you what you could do about it. Whereas when you talk about online content creators, oftentimes there's a much more personal relationship about like, hey, here's something you could do about this, or why don't you give me some suggestions of how to cover this topic? And so there's lots of different ways that creators create this sense of benevolence, and I think it's something that legacy journalists could learn from. As one of them also, I'm forgetting, was disclosing that you don't know something. One thing in traditional media that we do a lot is write around, right? Like there's a fact that's missing and we're like, oh, we can write our way around it. But oftentimes in the creator world, the norm is actually to say, here's what I know, here's what I don't know, maybe you can help me figure out that piece, or here's a part that I don't understand about it, could the community help contribute to it? And that engagement builds this sense of like, oh, we're on the same team investigating this together, as opposed to I'm just here dropping knowledge on you from up on high. So, next slide. Expertise. Expertise is an interesting one because traditional journalism that I come from is, I wouldn't say hostile to expertise, but like mildly hostile to expertise, in the sense that you can't walk into a newsroom and say, I'm an expert on foreign relations, so you should let me cover foreign relations. You need to be an expert on journalism, and the idea of like, there's an idea in newsrooms that a good journalist could cover any topic. But what we're seeing in the creator world, which is really, I would say, TikTok, YouTube, Substack, is that experts often can commit acts of journalism that are quite meaningful. I mean, if you look at Heather Cox Richardson, which is the leading Substacker of the world, she's bringing her expertise as a history professor to looking at today's events. It's a different lens through which you would analyze it. It's not the way a journalist would just report the facts of like, today the president announced. But she actually, it turns out the audience finds that expertise really meaningful. I love this guy who came to one of my panels. He goes by Tanner Leatherstein on TikTok. He is a leather worker who basically buys bags, like leather bag, purses, and cuts them up to analyze how good quality they are. How good is the leather? How good is the stitching? How good is the finish? And it's mesmerizing to watch. I'm never going to buy one of these bags, but I love watching him destroy them. And honestly, it reminds me that I've been at many news outlets that have a fashion reporter or fashion critics. They've never provided me the value of information that this man is providing by literally ripping these bags to shreds. And that's the value of expertise, right? He's not coming into it as a journalist, but he is I think, committing an act of journalism, right? He is actually providing accountability, which is what I think the business of journalism should be about. So one other thing about expertise is that journalists often have come into this relationship with the audience with the idea that their brand name means that you should trust them. Whereas most creators come in with this idea like, I know you don't trust me. So they do provide more evidence, right? Not always, but a lot of times you'll see that they try to put up receipts, like on the green screen behind them, or they'll, like, he just shows you the ripping open. He doesn't say, like, I just proved this bag. He lets you watch him rip it open. And then actually sometimes what I find is really interesting is that there's less of a conclusion to the work. So basically, he might not say at the end, like, that you buy it or don't buy it. He's just like, well, the seams were good, but the leather was kind of mid. And then you can decide. Whereas the inverted pyramid format that I was trained in as a journalist is like the conclusion at the top and then all the evidence, whereas I feel like the creator version is the opposite, right? First you present all the evidence, and then sort of the audience gets to make its own conclusions. Even if you do present one at the end, they have been on the journey with you, and so they can evaluate that evidence for themselves. Next slide. And the final piece is what they call in the trust business integrity. And what that really means is consequences. Are there consequences when you abuse the audience's trust? And I will say that for legacy journalism, like, we don't have, journalism is not like a profession that you can get kicked out of, right? Like, there's no group that's going to say you are no longer a journalist, right? There are people who have committed quite egregious frauds in journalism, and they have been shunned or excluded, but also sometimes they haven't been. Sometimes they just keep on working, or they change outlets. And so there's also like a trend in journalism where like the people who were supposed to do some of that policing, the ombudsman, the public editors, that piece is disappearing. And so there's a feeling, I think, with a lot of people who talk to, when I run into people, they say, legacy journalism is not accountable. They just say what they say, and if they're wrong, there might be a correction 6 days later on this page, but you'll never see it. Whereas in the creator community on the vibrant platforms of TikTok, YouTube, Substack, there's a lot of give and take, right? The comments are where you go to find out actually if the video is real. My daughter, who's 20, she reads the comments first before she decides whether to watch the video, right? And if they're all negative, she's like, oh, that's not worth it. But if they're all good, she's like, oh, okay, maybe it's worth investing my time in. And I think that a lot of the creators that I've spoken to say when they post a video, they actually devote an hour or two to engaging in the comments, because that's part of publishing to them, right? Is responding. Somebody said, oh, what about this point? And this is particularly true on TikTok. They'll make another video to respond to the comment. And that engagement is a form of accountability to the audience that is clearly popular, right? And I think it really builds a community in a different way than legacy journalism has. And so I think that apology videos also is a very funny thing. It's a little bit weaponized. Some of you probably are familiar with, like, there's a little bit of like drama that happens on YouTube and TikTok sometimes where people call each other out and then do apology videos. And sometimes it's a ploy for views. But the reality is there's also legitimate apologies all the time where somebody will be like, you know what, in my last video I said this thing wrong. I want to correct it. Journalism just doesn't do that, legacy journalism, right? Even if we do a correction, it's very hard to find, and there's definitely never an apology. And that's because of our lawyers, and I think there's legitimate reasons for that, right? We're all being targeted. But I think it's something that we have to look at when we think about why doesn't the audience trust us. So next slide. Ultimately, I put together just like a little tiny chart of basically the fact is that of comparing these metrics, right? In journalism, people do not necessarily believe the journalists are on their side. Journalism, audiences do believe it often, at least the studies show that they believe journalists have expertise, but they don't think they have expertise in the field they're covering. They think the expertise in journalism. And there's also a lack of feeling that journalism is accountable to the audience. And so I think these are all things that legacy journalism can learn from creators. And I think also, of course, there's things creators can learn from legacy journalists, but I personally don't feel like I want to be in the position of lecturing to another field. Since I'm a legacy journalist, I'd rather be absorbing the lessons and knowledge from this emerging space where people really clearly do want to get their news and information from. Next slide. So that is it. That's my lightning talk. I hope it kept you awake at 3 o'clock, and I will leave it to the great panelists to discuss.
Thank you, Julia. So moderating our panel today is Liz Kelly Nelson, a journalist and media professional with a deep interest in the evolving landscape of journalism. Liz has held prominent roles at Vox, The Washington Post, and Gannett, and has recently founded Project C, which is a newsletter that explores and champions the work of independent journalists who are breaking away from traditional newsrooms to create their own direct-to-audience platforms. So please join me in welcoming Liz and our creator panel, Matt Shearer, Carmela Boykin, and Lisa Remillard.
Thank you, Tory. Thank you, everyone. It's great to see you here today. The talk that Julia just gave was a great setup. She's really talking about what she's observed in the creator space, and it's what I work with every day with the journalists who I come into contact with at Project C, who are all either already working in the creator space or, sorry to say it, thinking about leaving their newsrooms to head into the creator space and work there. So you're going to hear from this panel in a minute a little bit more about how they put this into practice and what they're observing in the work that they do and the audiences that they're interacting with. I am going to ask our tech folks to put a little bit of a slide up on the screen. I, earlier this year, worked with a few other folks who are colleagues of mine in the creator space to create something called the News Ecosystem Map. And what I was trying to do was really put into context where creator model journalists sit in the news ecosystem, not to help the audience understand, not to help anybody who might be out there looking for a news source to understand, but to help us within the journalism, in the journalism industry, understand where this sits. There's a QR code on the screen that you can look at, and we'll post this after the panel as well, so you don't have to worry about snapping a photo of it right now. But what I want you to understand, and the reason that I did this work, is to understand that our industry has continued to evolve. So when you look at the news ecosystem map, you'll see what is now funnily called trad news, all the way over on the left of the map that is very much what we might call legacy media, and it's spanning across to the right to worker-owned collectives, to the creator model journalism, and now like moving into the scary realm of the AI generated news. But to understand that this is an evolution that will continue happening, and it's one that we need to understand and be willing to reach out and build some bridges with. It is the future of journalism. It's what my 14-year-old is looking at when he is getting his news. So I'm really excited. Before I jump into the panel, I'll say I spent a day earlier this week at Medill in Chicago working with a group of local journalists who are working independently, and most of them have either launched small, what they call micro newsrooms, or are working by themselves to serve communities that were not seeing themselves served by the media in the Chicago ecosystem. And what I was talking to them about was how to borrow some of the things that Julia talked about in her lightning talk to continue to grow audience and build revenue. And there's a lot that we have to learn from this space, so I'm excited that we've got these three fabulous panelists here today to learn from. So we're gonna actually look at another quick video so that you can see them in action before you get to talk to them, and then we will jump into our discussion. So go to the tape.
To the math to get these 218 votes from right here. Think logically.
Elon Musk's team now has access to systems that control trillions in government payments.
For the past week, Boston's been like, what's up with that blimp? So I found it. Let's go for a ride.
So it's election day, and we just need to sit down and have a little conversation about patience.
This is the Sumner Tunnel.
If you see any water coming in, you just gotta run uphill.
That's one of my tour guides, Chris Blanchard.
It's a big hill.
We the union, no. We the states, no. We the people, yes.
But what next?
We said this ban is free speech infringement. Right, but we rule this as an act to protect national security. Oh no.
It's all over.
This is the end?
Hey, Boston, I know you think your birds are tough, but
I'm telling you, they got nothing on the seagulls of Cape Cod.
Okay, so now you know who you're dealing with. If you haven't already interacted with the content that's being produced by Matt, Carmela, and Lisa, but we're going to talk with them a little bit more about how they actually make this magic and what we can all learn from it. So we all were standing right back there behind that little screen a few minutes ago watching Julia's talk, and it was so incredibly clarifying to think about why it is that the kinds of content that you're creating is connecting with audiences, especially younger audiences. But I am interested in hearing from you. I'll start with you, Matt and Carmela, about what it was about Julia was saying that like resonated with you and the kind of work that you're putting out into the world.
Yeah.
No, you first.
I thought that Julia's talk was an excellent precursor to what we're talking about, and we were even back there like nodding. We were like, yes, that's right on the money, that's excellent. And I think one of those big things that she hit on was the difference between creators and legacy media. And the work that I do at the Washington Post, I'm on a team called the Washington Post Universe. We work on TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels. Is all of our content is accountable. We do get feedback from the audience, and we're constantly looking at what is the audience thinking? Did the audience understand what we're talking about? And if they don't understand, well, let's make a follow-up video talking about what they didn't understand. And in certain cases, we'll even explain how we got to that information. When the war in Ukraine started, there was a lot of misinformation on TikTok. And one of the things we would do is go and show footage that we know is from Ukraine and show exactly how we got that, whether that's from a Washington Post journalist in like those spaces, or we'll show, well, this is where we got the footage from, this is how we know that it's been cross-checked, and we basically open that transparency process, and that really builds a relationship with the audience that we found works well.
That's amazing. I love the Washington Post universe. It's kind of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Exactly, that was the intention.
What about you, Matt?
Yeah, no, I think, and I don't want to pretend to say that I know what Gen Z is thinking when they're watching videos, right? I'm a millennial myself. I have 2 kids. It's ridiculous, but I think, but like from what I've seen and what I gather and the way I just feel when I'm posting a video, authenticity is so important to them. I think, you know, they've grown up, their parents have maybe put on TV news, and they've seen the people in their nice suits talking like this and feeling like maybe they're getting lectured to. Whereas on social media in the creator space, we're not lecturing with them, we're lecturing them, we're hanging out with them. Most people are watching a video by themselves. Maybe they're on their couch, maybe they're in their room. We're literally in the room with them, and so we need to talk to them like that, act like that. The minute my video started taking off is when I got rid of the button-up shirts and the khakis and started being a t-shirt and jeans kind of guy and just talking to them like my friends. So yeah, I loved Julia's talk, and I think it's so important that we all just break down that wall and be ourselves.
Right, it's that relatability, right? Like I can see you could be my friend. In fact,
100%.
Parasocial relationship.
We could be friends. Agreed, Liz.
Yeah. Don't get ahead of yourself. So kidding. Lisa, so unlike Carmela and Matt, who are still working within news organizations, you are out there on your own. You're posting videos. You posted one right before you walked into this panel that probably millions of people are actually looking at right now, because if you don't know, she's kind of a big deal. So
well, I didn't want to say it, Liz, but
tell us what it is that you think that you're doing that you're not seeing news organizations do.
I think what you guys are saying is absolutely correct. So I come from the traditional, like, good morning, I'm Lisa Remillard, welcome to Good Morning San Diego, right? Like that was my on-air persona. And I did that for many, many years. And when you guys were watching the compilation video, how many times have you ever watched a local news broadcast and chuckled at something that you saw? Do you see the connection that you guys just made with all of us by watching those videos? Yes, they might seem a little silly or out there, but they're not. We're all presenting fact-based journalism. We're all doing it. We're just doing it in a way that is connecting with an audience. In a way, and I've seen both sides of it. I've seen the broadcast side of it, where I anchored a morning show, right? And you always think of morning show and you think you're connecting with those morning show audiences because you're getting your breakfast ready with the TV on in the background, so you know those people. But I never had that kind of connection with the TV audience the way I do now. So to what you guys are saying, just being yourself, and what broadcast is not doing. They are not making connection, even though you think you might be because of the legacy brand name on your station building, you're not making the connection with your community because you're not engaging them in a way where they're watching you like this, which is one of the most intimate things you can have.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the trust stuff that Julia got into in her talk. Success on these platforms often, requires breaking kind of the traditional roles, what you were just talking about, Lisa. And then, Matt, you were talking a little bit about tone and presentation, taking off the suit and like being a jeans and t-shirt guy. We're BFFs. But how do you balance that? How do you balance serious journalism with humor? How do you know when to calibrate what your level of like being fun, Matt, is with being like serious? I have something to impart to you. And, is that a discussion that you have with yourself, with an editor? Like, tell me about that process.
I mean, I think it's important with any kind of humor, whether it be in the news or anywhere, to not force it. Mm-hmm. And so I try not to force it. Sometimes the story that I'm telling just lends itself to a funny moment that happened. But you're right, there are stories I tell where that's not the case. There's a tragedy involved, something in where you need to just take a more serious tone. Mm-hmm. And you have to think of a way to kind of ease people into it. I mean, if you open up a video on TikTok, like you might open up a traditional TV news broadcast and say, 3 people are dead after a blah, blah, blah. I don't know. People might tune out of that, but I don't know. Maybe there's another way to ease your way into it with somebody reacting to something and feeling something, connecting with them to make them feel something. So where do you inject humor? I think where it makes sense and where it happens naturally.
Gotcha. So sticking with tone, Carmela, I'm interested, what have you had to kind of unlearn from like your journalism training to be successful in the TikTok space? And I need to stop hitting my mic. Yeah.
I think what's interesting about the 3 of us up here is we've all have worked in local news or are in local news. I went to Syracuse University, studied broadcast journalism. My first job was working in Rochester, New York as a morning reporter. So I'm very familiar with the good morning. I'm live outside, yet another homicide, and take a look behind me. And I worked that job for 5 months. But this was my job after that. And what I had to unlearn from that period was it's really okay to break out of that intense voice and talk to people like they are your friend, because that's the kind of content that I want to watch. I find it the most enjoyable, particularly when I'm scrolling and like I'm unwinding, I'm laying on my bed. Like Lisa said, it's really an intimate experience, and so just kind of talking as you would talk to a friend and being like, oh my God, that's crazy. I say that all the time in my videos because that's how I really talk. And so that's something that switching into and giving myself permission to switch into, because I am working at a legacy organization, but that's what I found to be most successful.
Yeah, that's interesting. And again, it comes back to, like being very relatable. And I hear you saying, like talking like I'm talking to a friend. How much of that is like, is there a feedback loop that you are involved in? Are you actually having conversations with members of the audience? Are you going into the comments? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Constantly monitoring the comments. Sometimes, again, as we up here can talk about, being a creator, sometimes the comments do get to you, but it's a lot about looking through the comments and saying, okay, people can say, this sucks, and that's fine. But like, where are the critiques happening and what are different adjustments that I can make? One thing I started doing is I use like fluffy pens in my videos just because I think that they're fun. And when I really started first using them, I would go crazy and like wave them all over the place. And some of the comments would be like, that is so annoying. Please stop flailing them so intensely. And so I've tried to dial it down a little bit, but yeah, there definitely is a feedback loop.
Fluffy pens like that. That's the first thing I asked her when I saw her. I was like, I've never met her before until today. I watch her stuff all the time, and I'm like, where do you get the fluffy pens? I want to know. I want to know where they. Because I mean, but see, it's those types of things that like click with people that, and it could be a given like that. You saw me writing on my whiteboard, which I do all the time. I grew up Italian. And, well, I am Italian, but my mother, listen, but if you were grown up Italian, your mom had a wooden spoon, right? And so I now use it as like a pointer, because during the pandemic when I started, there was no pointer. I didn't have one. I'm like, well, what can I use? A spatula. So now I use a spatula to this day, even though I could get a pointer, but people love it. They're like, oh, the spatula's out. She's going to do math today, right? And it resonates. You've got to just find something that connects to people. I don't use it all the time.
There's something about that. There's something about the spatula that, it sounds silly, but it actually breaks down people's barriers, right, to be receptive to information. And Lisa, staying with you, I'm interested, like, aside from the spatula, like, what are other ways that, like you have seen your relationship either intentionally or just organically develop with your audience that you think could be interesting for the folks in this room to know?
I think that legacy media, and I saw it, we've been talking about it all day today. I saw it when I was in the newsroom, which was that social media was always a side note to the real news. And so I have seen the development with my audience because it's not side news. I am, the news for my 3.5+ million followers every day. And they depend on me every day. And so I show up, whether I feel great or I feel crappy that day, I show up just like I would to a job. It's a job. I mean, it's not a hobby, it's a job. And so what I would say to sort of legacy media is don't treat the social media department, or maybe you have one person working there, don't treat them as the sideshow Bob. Those people are going to be very important. If you want your station to survive, you better get on it. And I would also say, not to tell you guys what to do, but I would also, just because I know how newsrooms work, and oftentimes managers at stations don't want to give one person that kind of power, or don't want to sort of enhance one person over the brand. People on social media like people. They don't care about a brand. People like to look at people. People like to hear from people. So find the people in your newsroom who look young enough and can understand the, like we talked about, the language of the platform, can understand how to relate to the younger audience. I mean, or you could not, and we'll see who wins in the end, whether it's going to be social media or legacy.
Yeah, I hear that as somebody who did social in the past for newsrooms. It definitely is a dynamic and one that we need to overcome and get past. Another, I think, criticism that I hear a lot kind of from traditional news about news creators, and it is something that is a valid question, but is, well, how are you making sure that you're building rigorous journalism? How are you doing credible work? How does your audience know that what you're doing is factual when you are working independently, when you don't have an editor, when you don't have fact checkers, when you might not have a legal check? So coming back to you, Lisa, like, one, what does that look like for you, right? Like, what is your support system when it comes to you putting together your content? And then how do you signal credibility to your audience? Like, how are they looking at you and saying, this is a credible news source?
Well, I rely on my 20 years of being in local broadcast. That's my fact check system, quite frankly. I mean, I have a lot of experience doing it, and I see a lot of young people look at what we do and think they can sort of just jump in and do it the same. And I see them make all the mistakes I made when I was a green reporter in Tallahassee, Florida. I see them making those mistakes. There's a reason why that time is so valuable to me. So my fact-checking process is my own knowledge of how to produce and write and shoot my own stuff and edit my own stuff every single day. And I was saying to Liz earlier, it doesn't happen very often. So 99% of the time, it's just me. I'm the fact check. I show credibility, quite frankly, because I'm right. And I show up every day and I put out good information that's right every day. And I take a lot of pride in that. But every once in a while, like, there'll be a tone in a video that I think may be funny, but then I think to myself, well, would somebody else think it's funny? And I sort of run it by my old EP. I call her up and I'm like, hey, can you take a look at this video and just make sure the tone is not too much? But that's rare.
Yeah, and I was talking about this with you prior to the panel too. Project C, we run a Slack that has 50-ish creator model journalists in it, some of whom don't have an EP that they ever worked with because they're coming straight out of J school or just don't have that network built yet, but they're engaging in a lot of peer-to-peer editing, right? Like, they're saying, can you look at this for me? What would you change? Can you like help in, and it's really fascinating to see as that continues to develop. Carmela, you work in a newsroom that does have fact checkers, you have an editor, and I assume there's somebody in the Washington Post universe, right, who needs to sign off on your work. What are the pieces of that process that feel useful for what you're doing, and are there any that have felt cumbersome?
Well, I think one thing that's really great about our process, and that something that when I talk to other people at organizations or other corporate organizations, they talk about how slow the approvals process is. And one thing that's so excellent about our team, our manager, Lauren Sachs, is amazing. She approves things so quickly, and that's a massive part to our success. So when I'm writing during the day, I look at the Washington Post just like everybody else, and I decide what the top stories are that I want to cover, and then I let the team know that that's the story I want to cover. I write a script out, I literally write it in Google Docs, and I send it off to Lauren for approval. Within 10, 15 minutes usually, that script is approved or has notes for different kinds of edits. Then I take that, I write the entire thing myself, I shoot everything myself, I edit the entire thing myself, send it back to Lauren to make sure there aren't any spelling errors or anything. And in that creation process, if there's more details that maybe she doesn't know, she'll send it off to someone higher and whoever. Sometimes I'll work directly with the journalist of the piece because all of our content is based off of, or almost all of it is based off of pre-written articles. And sometimes working directly with those reporters is really awesome. It's one of my favorite things to do. And then once I send it off to Lauren again, I send off the final product to Lauren. She approves it. And then it gets published, and that's it. And that can happen within a day. And to be so quick with the news, of course, that's super important.
Yeah. What about you, Matt? What's your process?
Well, oh my gosh, I am connecting something that I've never connected before, and it's so true that Carmela is basing her stories off of the work of the reporters, which is great, and you kind of find a way to make that funny and adapted to social media, as opposed to, kind of what I think a lot of people think that they're doing, which is like, I see other newspapers having their reporters try to make videos on their own, and they don't quite get the language, but to have someone like Carmela and Dave and the whole team like actually making videos specifically for that platform is great. For my process, I'm in the same boat. I'm kind of doing all my own editing, research, everything like that, showing up to the scene and like experiencing the story and trying my best to convey that to people. I'm really lucky that I've built up a trust in the newsroom where they trust me to just go ahead and publish the story. So I do that on social media. And that may play into what we've been talking about where, some people still see social media as a side thing. But it started out the exact opposite for me, where I would go out and I'd create a story for the radio, and then that night I'd be like, all right, let me slap some B-roll on top of that and put it out there to social media and see what happens. And those videos were not the most engaging, watchable videos because, I was relying on people to actually listen, and asking people to like pay attention to stuff on social media is a big ask. But so what I would do is then I started experimenting with like shooting stuff specifically with the video in mind. And now my workflow is the complete opposite. I'll make the video first and then figure out how to adapt that to the radio.
Yeah.
And it just plays well. I feel like there's so much potential to grow our audience. Social media, for the people in here who do work in legacy newsroom still, social media has something that we don't have, whether it be radio, TV, or newspaper, and that's a For You page. That's an algorithm. We love to complain about the algorithm when it doesn't go our way. But that's like complaining about the refs when your team loses a sport. Like, you should always show up, right? But the algorithm is so amazing at actually putting your stuff in front of the people who are most likely to engage with it. And if we can convert any one of those people into a reader or a viewer or a listener, amazing.
Right, and especially with the younger audiences like my 14-year-old, that is where they're spending their time, right? So we need to be there as much as we possibly can and inject that into the algorithm. So completely agree.
Can I just add one thing to that really quick, which I think is a really important point, which is none of what sort of the independent people on social media that are outside of the legacy media could do what they do if it wasn't for local newsrooms, the Washington Post, the newspapers, right? Like, so what you guys, what we all do, but what the legacy media does is so important, and I don't want the legacy media to go away or feel like they have to, change their whole mantra for social. What legacy media does, social media folks couldn't do what we do without it, right? There's a lot of people aside for, you guys, but that rely on that base journalism to sort of make their content, and people that aren't even journalists, that talk about the news, like the newsfluencers, that just talk about news, that are opinion-based. They can't do what they do without you, without us. So don't feel like that needs to stop or slow down. That only needs to get bigger and amplified. And just Legacy needs to do a better job. I always say journalists are the worst PR people. We are the worst. We don't do enough promoting ourselves, promoting what you do, promoting why it's so important to have a journalist that tells the stories, that goes out, that shakes people down for information. Like that whole piece that nowadays, people have a really bad view of journalists for whatever reason. I will never understand that, but it's mostly because we're not doing a great PR job at telling everybody how much they need us, which they do.
And sorry, real quick, 30-second anecdote off of that. It's so true. There is a meme page from a local town on the North Shore here in Massachusetts where a lot of people in that town get their news from. And I've worked with this memer before on a story, and they came to me, and this ties in perfectly with the title of this session here. They came to me and said, hey, usually I'm just like riffing off of like the local news, but like some people have been coming to me about this incident that happened on a local college campus, and I want to be able to report it, but like, how do I do that? And they were asking me for advice and help on that. And I kind of gave them some of the stuff that we would think about in the newsroom. Be very careful with your phrasing. Phrase it in a way that cannot be disputed. So-and-so says this, so-and-so says this. Ask for comment from the school. They may not respond. That's fine. You say that. All this stuff. So, it's kind of like a two-way thing. Absolutely. We can learn from the creators about how to speak to social media, and they can learn from us about how to report factually.
Right. Yeah, I'm really glad that you went there, Matt, because I think there is like a really big opportunity for established news organizations and creators, especially at the local level, to really collaborate and reach more audiences, as you're saying, learn from each other. And I love the story that you just shared about being able to, be somebody who was able to help point them in the right direction, because as you could hear, that creator wanted to do right by their audience, right? They really wanted to do the right thing and make sure they were getting it right. Lisa, I'm interested in knowing from you, like, A, have you ever partnered with a news organization since you've launched on the creator path? And if so, or if not, like, what would be like enticing to you about doing that? Like, what would you be looking to get out of that relationship?
Well, I have never. My brand is built on being independent, and I value that tremendously. My audience values that about my work. So I've never partnered with a news organization, but I've seen them in the past be successful. For me personally, I think I will always say that the best thing for a news organization to do is not to find people outside to validate them and their work. I always find that the best thing to do would be, if you want to partner with me, hire me to help you, consult with you to find the person in your newsroom that can tell your story, because telling your story is what makes it authentic. It doesn't make it authentic.
Yeah.
Lovely GBH having us here, right? GBH has a story to tell. So who within this organization can tell that story? Going outside to partner with somebody that's not part of GBH might feel inauthentic to an audience, because all of a sudden, is it that person's content? Is it your content? Where is it coming from? Simpler is always better, especially when we're talking about social media, because as we've been saying, people have this much of an attention span. Yeah. Like, the attention span is so short. So if you can simplify it, do that. And for me personally, I don't know that a partnership like that would work, but it might in certain scenarios if you're co-working on a story together, and like there's real legitimate work from the creator and real legitimate work from the organization, and that makes sense, then yes. But if you're gonna just pluck someone because they're popular on social media, I would I would advise against it.
Yeah, really evaluate what your intentions are on
Right.
both sides.
Right.
Both sides. All right, so we're coming up on kind of like final questions, and then we're going to ask for some questions from the audience so that you can get a chance to quiz these fine folks. So the last kind of like lightning round of questions that I want to ask each of you, and we'll start with you, Matt, is what's one thing that you or your news organization is doing right now that you think these folks could take back to their organizations and try right now?
Let creative people be creative. This is something I preach all the time. It's that journalism is storytelling, and storytelling is an art form, the oldest form of art ever. People sitting around a campfire telling stories. And it's weird to think of journalism in terms of art, right? But there's a creative element to it. And so let creative people do their work.
Yes. Fabulous. All right, Carmela.
Similarly, let creators take risks. It's really okay. And those risks are going to take time because in this kind of situation, the risk is it doesn't get views. And that's really it. So when you're creating good content, when our team started publishing on YouTube Shorts, it was when one of the initial TikTok bans was threatened, was threatened over creators. And I went to my team and was like, we should really diversify where we are. Doesn't matter if it doesn't do well. And it took a really long time for our YouTube Shorts channel to grow, but now it's our fastest growing platform. So really giving creators the opportunity just to continue to try and make mistakes. And then eventually I'm sure they'll be successful because everyone wants their content to do well. So.
Yeah. That's a great tip. Thank you. All right, and then Lisa, like, what's something that you're doing out there in the creator world that you think newsrooms could adapt or borrow?
I will die on this hill that the audience needs journalists. Full stop. So find somebody in your organization to tell your story, to tell the stories of the day on social media. Find them, and like Carmela and Matt were saying, let them be themselves, let them do what they don't have an overly broad or overly constricting approval process, don't stifle them, because what works for traditional broadcast doesn't necessarily work. And I've been in both, and I can tell you, I would never tell a story the way I used to on television, the way I do now.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we are going to open up the floor for questions. Sandy has a mic that she will rove with, so just raise your hand if you have a, and Julia is going to rejoin us. That's why we have this empty chair up here. If you've been wondering, we don't have a ghost panelist.
Hello, guys. My name's Raheem. I'm a creator journalist. I'm also Gen Z. And a lot of people, I work with a lot of student journalists, and they're a lot more interested in kind of getting into this world that you guys are. So my question for you is, what advice would you have, especially at a time when this is such a new kind of evolving creator, journalism landscape, and then at the same time, at least for someone who is kind of experienced, what advice would you have for them to kind of transition from that experienced journalism into creator journalism?
If I could go quickly first, I just want to say, something I always tell young people who want to get into this big, great question, by the way, is there has never been a better time to be a young person trying to get into it for the first time. I remember the complaint that all my fellow millennials had getting out of college was, oh my gosh, everywhere only wants to hire people with experience, and I don't have experience, so how can I get that first job? But now I'm starting to see more and more newsrooms want to bring in Gen Zers like yourself who understand social media, and if you want to have experience, you can do it. You have all the tools you need right now to just start making stuff in your pocket. So just start making stuff, and you're going to build up an amazing little portfolio to be there for you when you go applying for jobs.
Mm-hmm. And similarly to young journalists, it's easy to get caught up in, is this getting views? Oh, I posted it and it got 2 views. What do I do? When I was in Rochester, I knew from the first day I didn't want to work in local news forever. So I started my personal TikTok account vlogging my days. And they were not getting views. They were getting 50, 70 views maybe, and that was a good day. And so just starting and getting those reps in, getting that practice in, really builds you a portfolio. And that's how I ended up getting this job as well. So just start.
Yeah. Great.
From the Newton Beacon, which is a online publication. So when everything's said and done, how do you make a living? And it'll be different if you're working for a corporation than on yourself, for yourself.
Yeah, I can actually jump in for a second on this one. So with Project C, I run a workshop called Going Solo. That's a 6-week workshop that we've now taken 2 cohorts through, and we have a wait list of about 70 folks who want to do this. And a big part of that is we don't necessarily need to teach them as much the journalism side. They know how to do that. We need to teach them how to build a sustainable business, and I'm here to tell you it's 100% possible. Folks are doing it every day. There are actually a lot of young journalists that are getting really excited about this because it's a way to take control of their financial destiny in a climate where journalism jobs are not as sustainable as they have been in the past. We've had a lot of rounds of layoffs. So how they make money, it depends on whether they're on YouTube or on newsletter platforms, but it's a mix of subscriber revenue, sponsorships. I am continuing to angle for funders to grant money to creators who are doing really good work. So there isn't as much as there should be at this point as a trickle, but we need to open up that funding a little bit more. But it is amazing how much audiences will support people who they really believe in, and a part of how they do that, how these creators do it, maybe not you two, because you're still with institutions, but it's being really transparent about, like, this is how I'm living, this is how I'm paying my mortgage, this is how I'm putting my kid through school, this is how I am able to bring this work to you, and people will pay for it. So you see a lot of journalists who are working in the creator space who explain exactly how much it costs to do the work that they're doing, and their audiences are there to support them in it. I don't know if anybody else
I mean, listen, I always say I didn't get into journalism to be a millionaire. I don't think any of us, got into this business thinking that was a reality. But I'm living it every day. I think of myself and my the Newsgirl brand as a small business. That's how I have to, and I had to rewire my journalist brain into a small, business owner brain. And I don't take sponsorship deals. And I have an ethical problem with that just because of my history coming from local news. I would never do an on-air commercial. So why would I do an on-air commercial on my platform where people trust me to give them the news? So that takes a huge funding source out of the mix for me. So like Liz is saying, I have a really great subscriber base. And then I am part of the creator programs at all the platforms, on all the social media platforms. Yeah. But you're not going to make $1 million doing it. You can make a good living if you dedicate to it, but it's not something that you're going to be rich off of.
Right, and that's a great point because most of us, as you say, we get into journalism because we care about the mission, its vocation. And most journalists, unless you're at the very top tier, are not getting paid a lot in newsrooms either, or not there to make $1 million. Right. They're making a sustainable living. So if there's a way to do that kind of outside the system and kind of take control of that piece of how you support yourself, like it's actually a pretty interesting path for some of these new journalists now.
And just in case people don't know, the creator funds she's referring to, basically all the different platforms will share the ad revenue generated based on like your view count. Essentially, you get a portion of it. And the great thing about that, and YouTube is sort of the gold standard for that, is that you don't have to sell the ads. So you're not compromised by it. You just literally, once you reach a certain threshold of viewership, you just get automatic money every month. It's a pretty great model. It doesn't usually support more than 1 to 3 journalists maximum in a newsroom. 3 is like a really high level. Yeah. And so it isn't particularly scalable. But just in case people don't know what the Creator Fund is.
I should have been more clear. Thank you for that.
I'm here for that.
Hi, this is a question for Matt. I'm Kevin. I work here at GBH. So in a lot of your videos, you find just super interesting, often odd people. And the story, the narrative kind of just, you let them kind of lead the way. And I'm wondering how you landed on that approach and what makes it particularly effective.
Yeah, thank you. So I think there's one particular series I do that's really popular that you may be referring to, where I show up in a random small town in Massachusetts and just meet the different people, no prior research, nothing set up in advance, and just see where the day takes me. And it's like when you tell a news director that that's something I'm doing, they like are triggered. They're like, what? You're literally doing a non-story? That's how you're spending your day? But it's extremely popular because it's real and it's authentic. And And like personality-driven stories are so huge. Like when people can care about the people that they're talking to, I mean, it's, you know, you're going to connect with them on a whole new level. So I'm just so drawn to that because I'm a really curious person. Everywhere I go, I'll be sitting at a traffic light and see someone walking by and be like, huh, wonder what their story is. And I know there are a lot of other people out there in the world that are like that too. And now I get paid to answer that question. What's that guy's story? What's his deal? You know, could he get in my car and come for a ride with me and show me around his town and tell me stories? I bet those stories are a lot more interesting than some CEO who speaks in the language of press releases can tell me, you know? So that's where that comes from. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Hi, Michelle Johnson, Professor Emerita of Journalism from Boston University. First, I've seen all three of you guys. You come up in my feed on TikTok all the time.
I love to hear it.
You guys rock. What I'm curious about is what you guys think about Aaron Parnes, because to my knowledge, he doesn't have a journalism background. However, he blew up on TikTok when people stopped watching traditional media after the election. How do you think he attracted that audience? You know, what is it about him that's, you know, drawing people to him to get their get their news every day?
I mean, what I see from Aaron is the same thing that we all do, which is consistency. He is there all the time, right? Like, you cannot open TikTok without seeing his videos. And it's not necessarily, well, of course, I also say that there's an algorithm god that picks and chooses, right? There's certain influencers that all of a sudden become very popular, and there's no rhyme or reason to that. Who knows how people get selected? That's why I call it the algorithm god, like whatever. But I see Aaron, aside from the algorithm god, who has clearly picked him, obviously, he puts out, if you've ever looked at his page, he puts out like 30 videos a day. I mean, it's insane. I don't know how he does it, but that's why he blew up. I mean, on TikTok at least, the name of the game is volume. So if you're putting out a lot of videos, you're gonna appear more because you're telling TikTok, I wanna be on this platform. I want you to show my content because here I am putting 90,000 videos. Now, I don't subscribe to that because that's just not my vibe. That's not what I do, and that's not the kind of content I put out. But that's a niche that he has, like, grabbed hold, like strangleholded.
Quick thought on that. I agree. I think volume is a great way to build an audience quickly, but what I see is diminishing results in terms of engagement. So if you're posting 10 times a day, you may not get as many videos as someone who posts like every other day, which is more my speed. You know, I'll do like 2 or 3 videos a week, which is slow, but keep in mind, I got a lot of work to do. Yeah, a lot of production.
Right.
But I get a lot more engagement per video than the people who have more followers than me that are posting like every day. So I guess it depends on what your goals are.
And that speaks to our strategy as well. I found that, yes, I can make videos 5 days a week, but that burns me out, and that's a lot of work, especially because the editing process takes so long. But for us, when we take a little bit more time, the reason I have 3 of myself is because if you're not paying attention to the Carmela in the front, the back 2 are also doing something that you are, and that helps the engagement over time. So it's constantly figuring out, how can I add different things that create engagement? So that's why you see the costumes, different things. That's why you see the spoon, different things that people can comment, keep watching, they can engage on, and it creates a really nice ecosystem.
Yeah. Can I add something, which is I think it also has to do with the platform maturity. So YouTube in its early days was also kind of a volume-based game, and some of the early creators really went for volume to build up their early audiences. But now that YouTube is more mature, you see that actually there's like a kind of what they call flight to quality, where a lot of the leading creators, like there's one guy who posts once every 3 months, and he has like 10 million views, and people just wait for that one video, which is 4 hours long. I kid you not. And so I think TikTok is in its early days, and so there's a little bit of that same volume game that's coming out, and as it becomes more mature as a platform, it'll shake out, and there'll be more of a flight to quality.
I mean, I do 2 videos a day by myself. So it's basically, in local news terms, it's 2 full packages a day. and I do it by myself every single day, but I make sure that's my consistency. So it's either 2 or 3, depending on, what's happening in the world.
All right. Well, listen, we had a lot of insights, a lot of interesting things that we're wrestling with as we think about this going forward, but it feels like the future is really bright for the 3 of you. Julia, I'm excited to see more of the research that will be coming out of your work that you're doing. And thank you so much to all of you for the great questions and for joining us today.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.